The mountain shook with the thunder of war. From the carved balconies of Stonehearth, Queen Merla watched smoke curl upward from the lower halls where the fighting raged. Shouts carried through the tunnels like the roar of a furnace, echoing, with steel on steel, the crack of crossbows, the death cries of her people. Her husband, King Thrain, stood beside her, fists clenched on the rail, his face twisted with fury. Once the dwarves had called him strong, unbending as iron, but years of his heavy hand had worn those words into curses. Now his crown seemed a weight too great even for him to bear. "They betray me," Thrain spat. His voice was gravel, every word sharpened by rage. "Our own kin, cowards who'd bow to elves rather than stand with me." Merla placed a hand on his arm. "The people are weary, my lord. They've bled for too long. They need hope, not silence." He shook her off, eyes blazing. "Hope is for fools. Only strength holds a kingdom." She said nothing more. She had learned long ago that reason was wasted on Thrain. His throne was his pride his curse. Yet her heart broke as the fires spread. She loved her people, even if their king did not. And she loved her son, only 4 winters old, still chasing toys carved from oak. She would not let war devour him. The doors of the high hall burst open. A bloodied captain stumbled in, helm dented, beard scorched by fire. He fell to his knees before the throne. "My king, the rebels, they've breached the forge ward. The great gate is fallen. The hall of ancestors burns." Thrain's face darkened. "Then put it out. Fight them back, by stone and steel." The captain lowered his eyes. The guards turned their blades. The rebels were inside before we knew. Silence fell heavy. Merla's heart clenched. The Hall of Ancestors was no outpost. It was the heart of the mountain, where the kings of old lay entombed. For it to fall meant the kingdom itself was cracking apart. Another voice rang down the corridor, hurried, fearful. A servant, pale as chalk, sprinted into the chamber. He did not kneel. "The king is dead," he gasped. All eyes turned to Thrain. For a heartbeat Merla thought she had misheard. Then she understood. The servant meant not this hall, but the lower one, where rebels had struck down the king's likeness in effigy. Or perhaps he spoke prophecy, for in that moment, the great doors behind them slammed wide again, and a dozen armored dwarves stormed in, blades red with fresh blood. The captain drew his axe, but was cut down in a blink. The rebels poured into the chamber like a flood, shouting curses against the tyrant who had bled them dry. Thrain roared and charged, swinging his warhammer. He felled 2 before a spear pierced his chest. The force drove him back against the throne, where he sank down, eyes wide with disbelief. Blood darkened his beard as he slumped forward. Merla froze. All her hatred of his cruelty, all her grief for what he had wrought, none of it dulled the shock of seeing her husband die before her eyes. She clutched the rail, trembling, while the rebels turned their gaze to her. "Where is the boy?" One snarled. His armor was scorched, his face streaked with soot and blood. "The brat heir, he must not live." The words jolted her like ice. She could almost hear the soft laugh of her son Durin echoing in her ears. Without another thought, she spun and fled down the servants' passage, skirts tangling at her feet, her heart hammering. Behind her, the shouts rose again. "Find the queen! Find the prince!" The halls of Stonehearth were no longer safe. Her husband was gone. The crown was broken. And Merla knew, with every breath burning her chest, that only she stood between her child and the blade of a rebel. She would not fail him, not while her legs still carried her, not while her heart still beat. The narrow servants' passage twisted downward, barely wide enough for Merla's skirts to brush along the rough stone. Her breath came quick, echoing in the dark, each footfall sharp in her ears. She knew these routes only dimly. A queen seldom tread where scullery maids and runners worked. But desperation lent her memory. She burst through a low arch into her own chambers. The fire in the hearth was dying, casting long shadows across tapestries of gold and crimson. At the far corner, upon a carved bed too large for him, little Durin stirred beneath blankets. His round face peeked up, eyes bleary with sleep. "Mother?" His voice was soft, puzzled. Merla swept to him and gathered him into her arms. He smelled faintly of milk and cedar, his tiny fists curling into her braid as he pressed against her. Her heart nearly split at his warmth. "Hush, my love," she whispered, kissing his brow. "We must go. Quickly now." Durin blinked, sensing her urgency, though too young to understand. He clutched the wooden toy axe he had fallen asleep with. She let him keep it. It might comfort him when nothing else could. At the door stood two of her loyal handmaids, pale but resolute. Behind them loomed Boric, captain of her guard, broad-shouldered with an axe strapped across his back. His armor bore fresh dents, his face streaked with soot. "My queen," Boric said, bowing his head. "The king is fallen. The rebels scour the halls. We must reach the lower vaults before they close the gates." "I know." Her voice trembled, but she forced steel into it. "Lead us." They moved swiftly, Merla clutching Durin close as Boric guided them into another passage. Shouts echoed faintly behind. Searching rebels, their boots pounding stone. The secret tunnels bent downward, deeper into the mountain. The air grew colder, tinged with iron and ash. Boric's torch threw flickering light upon walls carved with ancient runes, reminders of older kings who had ruled with wisdom rather than fear. Durin pressed his face into Merla's shoulder, his tiny voice muffled. "Why do they shout, mother?" She swallowed hard. "Because they are lost, my darling. But we are not. Hold to me." Boric slowed, listening. The faint clang of armored feet rang ahead. He raised a fist, signaling silence. The handmaids pressed, against the wall, wide-eyed. Merla crouched, covering Durin with her cloak. A band of rebels emerged from the darkness, carrying lanterns and bloody axes. Their leader's voice was low and harsh. "Search every hall. The brat must die, else our cause is wasted." They passed within a few strides. Merla's breath caught, heart hammering so loud she feared it would betray them. Durin whimpered, softly, and she pressed her hand over his mouth, whispering comfort in his ear. When the rebels' light faded, Boric gestured onward. They slipped through a side crack in the stone, descending steeper still. At last they reached the vault stair, a spiral plunging into the belly of the mountain. At its base lay an iron door, carved with runes of warding. Beyond it stretched the old mining roads, forgotten to most, but leading to hidden exits on the mountainside. Boric shoved against the iron door. It groaned open, cold air rushing in. The cavern beyond yawned vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, pillars of stone rising like giants. The sound of distant water dripped endlessly. They had barely stepped inside when a horn blast echoed behind them. The rebels had found the trail. "Go!" Boric barked. He hefted his axe, planting himself in the doorway. "I'll hold them here." "No!" Merla cried. "You cannot stand alone." He gave her a grim smile, eyes fierce. "A queen's life is worth mine 100-fold. The prince must live. Go!" Rebels' shouts grew louder, torchlight flickering on the stair. Boric roared and slammed the door shut, locking it with a rune key from his belt. His voice thundered through the stone one last time. "Run, my queen, for Durin!" The sound of steel clashing erupted beyond the door, then muffled into echoes. Merla clutched Durin, tears streaming, and stumbled deeper into the cavern. Her handmaids followed, pale and shaking. Durin peered up at her, frightened but calm. "Will he come after us, mother?" Her voice cracked. "In spirit, always." The cavern road stretched ahead, endless and dark, but Merla pressed on. For every step she took, she whispered the same vow into her son's hair. "You will live. You will see the sun again. No crown, no war, no tyrant will take you from me." And though her heart broke with each echo of battle left behind, her resolve burned, brighter than fear. The Queen of Stonehearth was no longer wife to a king. She was a mother, and she would not let her son die. The road through the cavern sloped upward, winding between jagged stone pillars that had stood since the first delving. Merla's torch sputtered against the cold air, its light no match for the immensity of the dark. Each step echoed too loudly, as though the mountain itself announced their flight. Durin clung to her neck, heavy with drowsy fear, his wooden toy axe pressed to his chest. Every so often he lifted his head, wide eyes scanning the shadows. She smoothed his hair and whispered, "Courage, my jewel. The dark cannot harm us." But she could not keep her own fear hidden. She knew rebels would not tire. Already, Shouts and horns had begun to ripple through the halls above. Rumor spread faster than flame. Queen and prince on the run, prey for every desperate hand eager to buy safety with betrayal. The cavern road split into the old districts, stone chambers carved with statues of miners and smiths, long abandoned, when veins of ore ran dry. Collapsed roofs left gaps where daylight had once filtered in, now little more than shafts of stale air. One handmaid stumbled on the rubble, nearly dropping her lantern. Merla steadied her with her free hand, her grip fierce. "Quiet! They'll hear us!" Boric's sacrifice weighed on her chest like a stone. She could still hear the clash of his axe, the roar as he barred the rebels' way. He had sworn to protect Durin from the moment the boy was born. Now his oath was sealed in blood. Durin shifted, whispering against her ear. "Is Boric coming soon?" Merla's throat closed. She forced a soft smile. "He guards us from behind. He is watching the road, so you and I may walk it." Durin seemed to accept this, but she saw the wet shine of tears on his cheeks. He was only a child, yet tonight he was asked to carry more than any dwarf his age should. That thought hardened her resolve. If she faltered, he would have nothing left. They pressed deeper into the abandoned districts. Faded murals lined the walls, showing dwarves of old raising hammers to forge crown and kingdom. Dust lay thick, stirred by their passage, filling the air with the taste of ash. Then came the sound she dreaded. Boots on stone far behind. Rebels hunting. Their voices echoed faintly, cruel laughter carrying. Search the mines. The queen won't run far with a brat in her arms. One of the handmaids whimpered, clutching at Merla's sleeve. The queen hissed, "Keep moving. If they catch us, Durin dies." They ducked into a side tunnel. The passage narrowed, jagged stone pressing, close, until it opened suddenly into a collapsed chamber. A shaft of pale moonlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, painting the rubble in ghostly silver. Merla lowered Durin for the first time, setting him gently on his feet. His little legs trembled but held. She brushed dust from his curls and forced her lips into a smile. "You see, my jewel? Moonlight. Proof the world above still waits for us." Durin reached out tiny fingers toward the beam of light, awe softening his fear. He laughed quietly, the sound fragile but true. For a heartbeat, Merla forgot the blood and ruin behind them. Then a clatter rang out, pebbles tumbling from the tunnel they had left. Voices rose closer. "They went this way!" Panic surged. Merla snatched Durin's hand and pulled him toward another exit on the far side of the chamber. The handmaids followed, skirts snagging on stone. The rebels' lanterns flared in the passage behind, shadows stretching. Merla's heart thundered as she shoved Durin ahead, whispering, "Run, my love, run!" The boy stumbled but obeyed, clutching his toy axe as if it were steel. They broke into another passage, narrower still. The air grew damp, carrying the stink of old water. Somewhere ahead, Merla thought she heard the faint trickle of an underground stream. Escape lay there. If only they could reach it. Behind, the rebels cursed, voices bouncing from the walls. "Find them! The queen's worth gold, but the boy's head is worth the crown." Merla bit back a sob. Her son's breath came in ragged gasps as he ran beside her, his tiny legs straining. She scooped him up again, ignoring the fire in her arms, pushing herself faster. Every heartbeat screamed one truth. They would never stop until he was dead. But neither would she stop until he was free. The damp passage narrowed, forcing them into single file. Water dripped steadily from cracks above, slicking the floor with mud. The torches sputtered in the damp air, casting jittering shadows across the rough stone. Merla clutched Durin tight to her chest, her boots sloshing through shallow pools. Her gown, once rich with velvet and silver thread, now hung torn and stained. Still she pressed forward, every step a vow. One of the handmaids lagged behind, her breath ragged. "My queen, I cannot!" Merla spun, fire in her eyes. "You can. He needs every one of us." But even as she spoke, lantern glow spilled into the passage behind. The rebels' laughter rang close, cruel and eager. "Corner them! Now!" the failing handmaid screamed. Before Merla could reach her, A spear flashed through the gloom. It struck the girl square in the chest, driving her back into the shadows. Her cry echoed once, then silence. Durin buried his face in Marla's neck, trembling. She forced her legs to move, choking back the sob clawing at her throat. There was no time to grieve. Each death was another stone on her soul. But if she faltered now, all of it would be for nothing. The remaining handmaids stumbled beside her, pale with terror. We'll never outrun them. There must be a hiding place. Merla's eyes darted across the jagged walls. Then she saw it, an old mining shaft, its entrance half collapsed, jagged timbers bracing a black hole in the rock. She rushed inside, dragging the others after her. The shaft dropped steeply, a crude stair carved ages ago. She descended carefully, clutching Durin, each step creaking under her weight. Above, the rebels' voices grew muffled, confused. They split, checked the lower shafts. The queen's heart pounded. They had bought a moment, nothing more. The shaft opened into a vast undertunnel, a cavern so wide their torchlight barely touched the far walls. Black water lapped against stony banks, fed by streams dripping from the ceiling. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth and iron. Durin stirred, whispering, "It smells bad, Mother." She kissed his hair. "Yes, but it will carry us far from harm." The handmaid knelt, dipping her lantern low. An underground river. "My queen, this runs beneath the mountain. If we follow it." Merla nodded grimly. "It may lead us out, or drown us. But we have no other path." They edged along the narrow bank. The water gurgled, swallowing the sound of their steps. Stalactites hung overhead like teeth. Halfway along, Durin whimpered, "I'm thirsty." Merla knelt, letting him sip from a clean trickle of water seeping from the wall. His small lips trembled, but when he looked at her again, she saw courage there, so much like her father's once had been. She stroked his cheek, whispering, "My brave little king." Before she could rise, the sound of pursuit returned. Boots pounding, voices echoing from the shaft above. The rebels had found the trail again. The handmaid cried out, "They're coming!" Panic flared. Merla scanned the cavern, then spotted a crude raft of logs, half buried in silt, perhaps left by miners long dead. With desperate strength, she hauled it free. "On, quickly!" They scrambled aboard, the raft groaning under their weight. The current tugged it forward at once, dragging them into the dark. Merla clutched Durin close as the raft swayed, the black water licking at the edges. Shouts erupted behind. Torches blazed at the bank as rebels surged into view. One hurled a spear. The weapon splashed into the water beside the raft, missing by inches. After them, the current seized the raft, sweeping it into the tunnel's throat. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only the hiss of water and Durin's frightened breathing filled Merla's ears. She pressed her lips to his brow, whispering into the void, "Hold fast, my son. Whatever the mountain demands of me, it will not take you." The raft plunged into the unknown, rebels' voices fading behind, while ahead yawned only endless black. The river carried them faster than Merla could have imagined. The current roared, dragging the crude raft through twisting stone veins that had never felt sunlight. The torch sputtered in the damp air, shadows flaring across jagged walls before winking out entirely. They were left in utter darkness. Only the rush of water and the creak of sodden logs kept time with Merla's heart. Durin whimpered, clutching her with all his tiny strength. She kissed the crown of his head, though he could not see it. "Hush, my love. Think of the sky, think of stars." But she herself feared they might never see them again. A sudden crash jolted the raft. Rocks scraped beneath, nearly splitting the logs apart. The handmaid screamed, flailing for balance. "We'll break apart!" Merla tightened her grip on her son. "Hold fast!" The raft spun wildly, slammed against a stone outcrop, then surged free again. Spray drenched them, cold as death. In the pitch dark, every second felt like the end. Then, faint ahead, a glow, pale, wavering. Not firelight, but the phosphorescent shimmer of lichen clinging to cavern walls. The glow spread, revealing the chamber ahead. Vast, echoing, its roof hung with stalactites that gleamed like blades. For a heartbeat, Merla felt awe. This hidden hall, older than kings, had guarded their people for centuries without their knowing. Now it bore witness to their flight. The awe shattered with another roar. A whirlpool churned where the river narrowed, dragging the raft toward its center. The handmaid cried out in terror, "We'll be pulled under!" Merla scanned desperately. To the left, a jagged shelf of stone jutted from the wall. If they could, leap to it. She thrust Durin into the handmaid's arms. "Take him!" The woman's eyes widened. "My queen, take him!" Merla's voice rang like steel. She seized the pole left half buried on the raft and rammed it against the current, steering them as best she could. The raft bucked, spun, and slammed against the stone shelf. With a cry, the handmaid leapt, dragging Durin with her. They tumbled onto the ledge, safe. Merla moved to follow, but the raft lurched violently, torn away by the whirlpool. She fell hard, clutching the slick pole. For a heartbeat, icy water swallowed her. Durin screamed, "Mother!" Summoning every shred of strength, she flung herself toward the ledge. Fingers clawed at slick rock, slipping. Then the handmaid caught her wrist, hauling with desperate strength. Merla dragged herself up, coughing, soaked and shivering, but alive. She pulled Durin into her arms, holding him so tightly he squeaked. She buried her face in his curls. "I have you. I'll never let go." The boy's small hands cupped her cheeks, tears streaming down. "Don't leave me, mother. Never." Her voice broke, but her vow did not. Together they crawled along the ledge until the river narrowed again into a low tunnel. The handmaid led, lantern flickering faintly. Merla carried Durin, her body aching, her heart fueled only by love. Last, after what felt like hours, they saw it. A thin beam of true moonlight spilling from a crack in the stone. The tunnel opened onto a ragged cleft high on the mountainside. Cold night air rushed in, sharp with pine and smoke. Merla staggered forward, clutching her son as though he were the crown itself. She stepped out into the night. Below, sprawling, across the valley lay the camp of the elves. Countless fires burned like stars, their banners fluttering pale against the dark. Siege engines bristled at the base of the mountain, while watchfires ringed the cliffs. Durin gasped, awe in his little voice. "Mother, the elves." Merla's knees weakened with relief. At last, safety of a sort. She could carry him no further. The rebels would never dare breach the elves' line. The handmaid's voice trembled. "If they'll take us in." "They will," Merla whispered, her eyes never leaving the distant glow of the elven camp. For the sake of a child, they must. And with that final thread of hope, she gathered Durin close and began the last descent toward salvation. The descent down the mountainside was cruel. Loose stones slid beneath Merla's boots, and every step jarred her weary body. Durin clung to her neck, his small heartbeat fluttering against her chest. She no longer felt her own pain, only the weight of keeping him safe. The handmaid stumbled behind, carrying the fading lantern. "My queen, look." Below, the elves' watchfires burned brighter. A patrol moved along the foothills. Tall, lean figures cloaked in pale mail, their bows glimmering with runes. For centuries, dwarves had cursed their names. But now, Merla saw not enemies, but saviors. When the patrol caught sight of them, horns sounded, clear and sharp. Dozens of elves poured forward, spears lowered. Their captain raised a hand, his voice ringing in a tongue Merla half remembered from long ago parley. "Who comes from the mountain?" Merla forced herself upright, clutching her son close. "Merla, of Stonehearth," she called, her voice raw. "Queen, widow, mother. I bring you the last heir of my house." The elves halted. Murmurs rippled through their ranks. They had expected war's spoils, not a broken queen bearing a child. The captain stepped forward, his sharp eyes softening when they fell on Durin. "The tyrant king is dead?" "Yes," Merla rasped, "slain by his own. And now they hunt. My boy." She lifted Durin higher, her arms trembling. "I ask not for my life, only his." Durin's eyes were wide, frightened yet trusting. He pressed his wooden toy axe to his chest, as if it were a crown. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then the elven captain lowered his spear. "He is but a child. He will come to no harm under our watch." Merla's knees gave way. Relief flooded her so fiercely it hurt. She sank onto the cold earth, still holding Durin. Elven hands reached to help her, but she waved them back. Her strength was nearly gone, and she wanted only to feel her son's warmth a little longer. Durin's voice quavered. "Mother, are we safe now?" She cradled his cheek, her thumb brushing his tears. "Yes, my jewel, you are safe. Braver than I ever dreamed." His little hand gripped hers fiercely. "Don't leave me." Her heart cracked. She drew him close, pressing her lips to his curls. "I must love, but you will not be alone. These people will guard you until the day you wear the crown your father stained. You will rule with the kindness he never knew." Durin sobbed against her, but she held him fast, rocking gently as though he were still the babe she once sang to sleep. The elves stood in solemn silence. They too seemed moved by this mother's final strength. One knelt, speaking softly. "Your son shall live, lady. By my word, he shall see peace." Merla's eyes grew heavy. Her body, driven past its limit, finally yielded. She kissed Durin's brow one last time, whispering, "Be strong, my little king." And with that, her breath slipped away like a candle guttering. Durin cried out, clinging to her lifeless form, until the elves gently lifted him into their arms. The boy's sobs echoed across the camp, raw and piercing. Yet even in his grief, the promise remained. Her sacrifice had saved him. In years to come, the elves would honor that night. Durin, raised under their protection, would one day return to Stonehearth not as a tyrant's son, but as a king molded by his mother's love. He would bring peace where war had reigned, and the dwarves would remember Merla not only as queen, but as the heart that saved a kingdom. Years passed. The mountain halls that had echoed with screams on that night of rebellion grew silent once more. Stonehearth, broken by tyranny and civil war, slowly rose from its ruin. The elves who had once laid siege now stood as uneasy allies, their camps fading as peace took root, and at the heart of it all was the boy who had once clutched a wooden axe in his tiny fists. Durin, son of Merla, had grown. The boy who had sobbed in his mother's arms became a youth of iron will and steady gaze. Raised in the care of elves and the last loyal dwarves who had escaped the purge, he learned both the ways of his own people and the wisdom of their once enemies. He was taught the craft of stone and steel, but also the patience of trees and the value of mercy. When he returned to Stonehearth as a young man, the halls still bore scars, blackened walls where rebels had burned, empty thrones where no king had sat. The dwarves gathered in the great chamber, uncertain, fearful, but hopeful. Durin stood before them, clad not in the heavy, spiked armor of his father, but in simple mail, a hammer at his side, and his mother's silver brooch at his breast. His voice, though young, carried through the stone like a hammer on an anvil. "My father ruled in cruelty. His name brought fear, and his greed brought war. But my mother gave her life that I might stand here. She asked only one thing of me, that I rule with the kindness he never knew, that I lead not with iron chains, but with open hands. And so I will." The hall, once divided, bowed their heads. Some wept. Others lifted their hammers in salute, for in him they saw not the shadow of the tyrant, but the light of the queen who had saved them all. That day, Durin was crowned King of Stonehearth. He was still young, but the crown did not weigh heavy upon him, for he carried it as he carried his mother's final words, like a promise carved into his very soul. And though Merla's body lay in a grave beyond the mountain, her presence filled every chamber. In the songs sung in the forges, in the banners raised in the halls, and in the eyes of her son when he smiled, she lived on. Durin ruled long and wisely. Peace grew where hatred once festered, and the bond between elves and dwarves, once unthinkable, slowly took root. Generations later, bards would still sing of the night the queen fled through fire and stone, cradling her son against the ruin of her world. They sang not of a tyrant, nor of rebels, but of a mother's love, unbroken, unyielding and strong enough to save a kingdom.